Keynes understood what this meant. He reportedly called the negotiations a financial Dunkirk. Britain was retreating, not from land, but from influence. When the final drafts were written, the Bancor was gone. In its place stood the dollar, and the future tilted permanently in one direction. Perfect. When the Bretton Woods Agreement was signed, there was no coronation, no announcement declaring the dollar ruler of the world, because true power does not announce itself. It normalizes itself. On paper, every currency still mattered. Each had its own name, flag, and government. But functionally, they were now satellites. Their value was measured against one thing, the US dollar, and the dollar alone was linked to gold. At $35 per ounce, gold appeared stable, but this stability was an illusion carefully constructed. Only central banks could access gold. Ordinary citizens could not. This small detail changed everything. It meant trust in money was no longer personal. It became institutional. Trade agreements were written in dollars. Reconstruction loans were issued in dollars. Global reserves were stored in dollars. Even countries that distrusted America had no choice but to depend on it. The dollar was no longer just a currency. It became infrastructure. Like electricity or shipping lanes, you did not vote on it. You adapted to it. And adaptation, repeated long enough, becomes dependence. By the late 1940s, the system was complete. The dollar didn't need to dominate politically. It dominated by being unavoidable. Alongside the new currency system, two institutions were created to protect it: the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Their language was calm. Their documents were dense, which made them perfect. The IMF was designed to manage crises, but crisis management always comes with conditions. Loans were not free. They required policy changes, spending cuts, currency reforms, market openings. The World Bank funded development, but development followed a model: infrastructure first, industrial alignment next, debt always attached. Voting power inside these institutions was proportional to financial contribution, and the United States contributed the most, which meant the rules reflected American priorities. Countries did not lose sovereignty overnight. They lost it gradually. One adjustment, one condition, one emergency at a time. This was empire refined. No governors, no flags, no declarations, just balance sheets that decided what a government could afford to choose. By the time nations realized what had happened, the system had already matured, and reversing it would require walking away from global trade itself. At first, the Bretton Woods system looked almost perfect. Trade expanded, currencies stabilized, reconstruction accelerated. For a generation, it felt like prosperity had finally been engineered. But beneath the calm surface, a contradiction was quietly growing. The world needed dollars to function, to trade, to save, to grow. And the only place dollars could come from was the United States. This meant America had to spend more than it earned, import more than it exported, run deficits permanently. What looked like generosity was actually obligation. Each dollar sent abroad strengthened the system and weakened its anchor. Gold reserves did not grow at the same speed. They couldn't. Promises multiplied faster than reality. This wasn't corruption. It wasn't incompetence. It was structural. The system demanded imbalance to survive. And every year it survived, the imbalance deepened. American power expanded outward: military bases, trade routes, financial influence. Manufacturing declined. Debt accumulated. Confidence depended increasingly on belief, not backing. The system could not be stabilized without breaking the very rules that made it work. And the longer it continued, the more violent the eventual correction would become. This was the moment history always reaches: when success itself becomes the problem. When the gold window closed in 1971, many believed the story was over, but Bretton Woods did not truly die. It evolved. The dollar remained dominant. Not because it was honest, but because it was embedded everywhere. Oil was priced in it. Debt was written in it. Reserves were stored in it. The world could not abandon the dollar without abandoning itself. And so, money entered a new era. An era without limits. Debt stopped being temporary. Crises stopped being rare. Intervention became routine. Each collapse was met with more liquidity. Each rescue required larger numbers. The system no longer promised stability. It promised survival. And survival, prolonged long enough, creates dependence. The deal signed in 1944 was never meant to last forever. It was meant to buy time. Time for reconstruction, time for dominance, time for adjustment. Comment below your opinion.
Before the 20th century, money was not an idea. It was a substance. You could touch it, weigh it, hide it in the ground. Gold did not care who ruled. It did not care about speeches, promises, or ideology. It imposed discipline silently. And that discipline shaped empires. For centuries, governments feared one thing more than rebellion: running out of gold. Because when gold vanished, trust vanished with it. But in 1914, something unprecedented happened. The greatest powers on Earth walked into a war so vast, so expensive, that honesty became impossible. They suspended gold convertibility. They printed currency faster than they mined value. They borrowed from the future to survive the present. At first, it felt temporary, an emergency measure, a necessary lie. But lies that save nations tend to become permanent. After World War I ended, currencies were weaker, debts were massive, and governments discovered a dangerous truth. You could survive without gold, as long as people still believed. That illusion limped forward into the 1930s. Then came the Great Depression. Banks collapsed, savings evaporated, trust in money shattered again. By the time World War II erupted, the world was no longer operating on sound money. It was operating on momentum. Printing presses replaced restraint. Debt replaced discipline. By 1944, the global economy wasn't broken. It was empty. And empty systems invite redesign. History textbooks tell us wars are fought for land, ideology, or freedom. But history's balance sheets tell a different story. Wars are fought over who controls the system that survives afterward. Napoleon didn't lose power when he lost battles. He lost power when Britain controlled credit. Germany didn't collapse after World War I because it was defeated militarily. It collapsed because its currency was destroyed. Money decides what grows back, and what never does. By the early 1940s, world leaders understood this with terrifying clarity. This was no longer about victory. It was about architecture. The Allied powers knew they would win the war, but they feared something else: winning the war and losing the future. The old gold system was gone. Returning to it was impossible. Too much debt, too many promises, too many lies already told. A new system had to be created. One that looked stable, one that felt fair, one that could last long enough for the winners to consolidate power. And so, quietly, before the war even ended, the real negotiations began. Not over borders, not over reparations, but over money itself. Bretton Woods was not chosen by accident. It was remote, surrounded by forests, far from cities, protests, and press. In 1944, secrecy was not paranoia. It was strategy. The war was still raging. Public morale was fragile. Any discussion about money, shortages, debt, inflation, could create panic. So the future of global finance was decided in a luxury hotel, behind closed doors, while the world looked elsewhere. Officially, 44 nations were invited. Unofficially, most were spectators. Smaller countries came hoping for stability. Some hoped for protection. Others hoped simply to survive the post-war chaos. But they did not come to negotiate power. Power had already arrived. The United States controlled the agenda, the drafts, and the timelines. Britain tried to look equal. But everyone in the room knew the truth. Britain was borrowing to attend the meeting. Its empire still existed on maps, but financially, it was hollow. Bretton Woods was not a discussion about whether America would lead. It was a discussion about how completely. And the location ensured something critical: no public debate, no democratic resistance, no time for alternative coalitions. By the time the world heard about Bretton Woods, the system was already designed. John Maynard Keynes entered Bretton Woods carrying more than papers. Keynes had studied the collapse of empires. He understood that financial dominance always carries a hidden decay. He saw the trap clearly. If the world depended on one national currency, that nation would gain enormous power, but also unbearable responsibility. Keynes proposed something radical: a global unit of account, independent of any country, not controlled by politics or war. He called it the Bancor. In Keynes's vision, no country could run permanent surpluses. No country could run permanent deficits. Imbalances would be punished automatically. It was elegant. It was balanced. It was dangerous to power. Across the table, American negotiators listened politely. Then they rejected it. Not because it was wrong, but because it limited them. America had no incentive to accept restraint at the very moment it held unmatched leverage. The war had made the United States the world's creditor. Its gold reserves were overwhelming. Its factories supplied half the planet. Why share power when the system could be built around